All right, kids, stay together. Don't run. Wait, did you see that? Oh my God. He understands him.
A 5-year-old boy, profoundly deaf from a young age, entered an animal shelter on a calm Tuesday morning alongside his kindergarten classmates. He remained completely silent throughout the visit. Not because he was unable to hear, not because he failed to grasp what was unfolding around him. He simply did not speak, and he had not uttered a word in years. What transpired in that shelter hallway was captured both by a security camera and on a volunteer smartphone. By the time the day ended, every staff member at the shelter found themselves replaying the same footage repeatedly, struggling to make sense of what they were witnessing. The boy's name is Liam. He is 5 years old. Liam was not always silent. As an infant, he laughed, babbled, and produced all the small sounds that babies typically make while learning to speak. His parents still recall the way he used to say, "Mama," before he could even take his first steps. Then something occurred when he turned 2. One afternoon, while Liam was playing outside near a neighbor's home, their dog suddenly charged toward him and began barking aggressively right in his face. The dog did not bite him. It never touched him, but the barking was loud, abrupt, and threatening. For a toddler, the experience was petrifying. Liam wept for hours that day. Initially, his parents believed it was merely a severe fright, but in the weeks that followed, something shifted. Liam stopped speaking. At first, they thought he was simply upset. Children sometimes withdraw after a frightening experience, yet weeks turned into months. The words never returned. Physicians eventually determined that Liam had become profoundly deaf, and his parents gradually came to recognize another reality. Liam hears nothing now, but this had not always been the case. Before the incident involving the dog, he responded to sounds just like any other child. He turned when someone called his name. He giggled at voices around him. He listened when his mother spoke. After that day, everything altered. The sounds slowly faded from his world. Thus, Liam discovered another way to communicate, through his hands. His mother, Megan, began acquiring basic sign language so Liam could express his needs. Initially, it was simple requests: food, water, sleep, toy. Over time, however, his hands evolved into his voice. He signed when he felt excited. He signed when he felt afraid. He signed when he wanted to convey something complex in the deliberate, earnest manner that only young children sometimes possess. He still understood spoken language by reading faces and expressions. He simply did not use it. Liam attends Oak Ridge Elementary School, and his kindergarten class had recently launched a modest community initiative called Kind Kids, Kind Paws. The concept was straightforward. Once each month, the class would visit a local shelter, interact with the dogs, create drawings for them, and gain knowledge about caring for animals. On that Tuesday morning, 12 kindergartners entered Riverstone Animal Shelter. The environment instantly erupted into commotion. Dogs barking, children laughing, teachers calling out directions, tiny palms pressing against kennel gates. For most of the children, the noise represented the highlight. For Liam, the hallway was soundless. He could observe the dogs barking. He could observe the enthusiasm on the other children's faces, but he could hear none of it. While the other children dashed from one kennel to another, shouting things like, "Hi, puppy," and "Come here," Liam walked slowly down a corridor. He paused before the first kennel. He lifted his hand and signed a simple greeting. "Hello." The dog inside jumped and barked. It did not look at his hands. Liam proceeded to the next kennel. He signed "Sit." No reaction. Another kennel. He signed "Good dog." Still no reaction. One dog after another overlooked him. Not because they were unfriendly, but because none had ever been taught that language. Every dog in that facility had been conditioned to respond to voices, not to hands. Liam did not appear troubled. He continued walking. He had spent his entire existence communicating in a manner that most people did not comprehend. He was accustomed to it. Then he arrived at the final kennel in the corridor. Inside sat a medium-sized dog with brown and white fur, possessing sharp, perceptive eyes. The dog's name was Rusty. Rusty had resided at the shelter for nearly 4 months, yet something about him puzzled people. They would call his name. Rusty would not react. They would instruct him to sit. Nothing. People assumed he was obstinate or inadequately trained, so they moved on to other dogs. Liam stopped in front of Rusty's kennel. Rusty ceased moving. The two regarded each other through the metal barrier. Liam gradually raised his right hand. He signed one straightforward command: "Sit." Rusty sat down instantly. No pause, no verbal cue, no reward, merely a subtle motion of fingers. A volunteer nearby froze. She had been recording the class visit for the shelter's social media page. Now she was uncertain whether she had genuinely witnessed what she thought she had. Liam signed again, "Stay." Rusty remained still. The dog's gaze followed Liam's hands attentively, as though they were the sole focus in the environment that held significance. Liam opened his hand and formed another sign. Rusty lifted his paw and set it gently against the kennel gate. Liam pressed his palm against the metal from the opposite side. The volunteer lowered her phone gradually. She had worked at the shelter for 3 years. She had never observed Rusty respond to anyone in such a manner. The shelter manager promptly retrieved Rusty's intake file and began reviewing it once more from the start. This time she observed something she had previously overlooked. The former owner, a 70-year-old woman named Margaret Lewis. Margaret had been deaf for the majority of her life. Rusty had belonged to her since he was a puppy, and every command he had ever learned had been taught using sign language. Sit, stay, come. Margaret had surrendered Rusty earlier that year, when she relocated to assisted living and could no longer care for him. She assumed someone would adopt him quickly. She had no idea he was still there. For 4 months, families had passed by Rusty's kennel, uttering his name, delivering verbal commands, clapping their hands. Rusty did not respond, not because he was stubborn, but because he was waiting for someone who communicated in his language. And on an ordinary Tuesday morning, a 5-year-old boy finally did. Megan observed as the volunteer played the footage again right there in the hallway. She watched Liam sign sit. She watched Rusty sit. Her hands slowly rose to cover her mouth. Liam turned to her. He signed 2 words. Mom, he understands. Rusty went home with them that afternoon. 2 days later, the shelter contacted Margaret and informed her of everything. A week afterward, Margaret met Liam and Rusty again in the shelter parking area. Rusty noticed her first. He dashed directly toward her. Margaret knelt down and wrapped her arms around the dog she had not seen in months. Liam approached slowly. He tapped her shoulder. Margaret looked up. Liam lifted his hands. He signed a simple phrase, "Good dog." Margaret smiled and signed back, "Yes, very good dog." Margaret signed the adoption paperwork that same afternoon. She paused briefly before handing it over. Her hands rested on the table a moment longer than necessary, gently stroking Rusty's head while Liam stood beside her, observing every gesture. Rusty was officially going home with Liam and his mother. As they exited the shelter together, Rusty remained near Liam's side, the leash hanging loosely between them. Liam kept looking down at him, still forming small signs with his hands, testing commands, observing how the dog reacted. Rusty understood every single one. From that day forward, mornings in their household began somewhat differently. Each morning before school, Liam devoted time to practicing signs with Rusty in the backyard. Sit, stay, come, paw. 6 months later, Rusty sleeps at the foot of Liam's bed, every night. Liam continues to live in total silence. He has never perceived a single sound in his life, but he does not need to, because the dog beside him comprehends every word he expresses, even the ones he never has to hear. Sometimes Liam invented new signs simply for enjoyment, small gestures that only the 2 of them understood. Rusty picked them up quickly, and something else gradually began to shift. Liam started smiling more frequently. At school, teachers observed that he appeared more at ease. He still did not speak, but his hands moved with greater confidence, and his face bore the quiet enthusiasm of a child who had finally discovered someone who understood him without effort. Because that was the peculiar truth of the matter. Liam had encountered someone he never anticipated meeting, and Rusty had been waiting for someone exactly like him. Months passed, then years. Today, Liam is older now. He walks to school, Rusty trotting beside him like a shadow. After class, they traverse the same neighborhood streets, occasionally pausing in the park where Rusty dashes freely across the grass before returning the moment Liam raises his hand. No voice, just a subtle motion of fingers. Rusty always understands. And occasionally, the people passing by notice the same thing the shelter volunteers noticed that day. The boy does not speak because some connections do not start with words. They start with someone finally speaking the language the other has been waiting to hear. If you enjoy videos like this, subscribe to Black Power for more. Thanks for your support.